Was it before?
It's okay, it's been a while.
I have
We're all
it.
entitled to be a little fuzzy on the memory.
Yeah,
It's not 103, I know that.
No, it's
It's after.
it's 237, 238. When you get in that vicinity, let me know.
237.
We are page 236,
Or 236.
Mishnah number 8. So Judah ben Tabai.
Oh, got it.
Okay, so page 236 in the Leiv Shalim Sidur, if you have that in front of you. We are in chapter 1, we are at Mishnah 8, and we are going to meet the next in the Zugot, the pairs of Jewish leaders of the Sanhedrin, where one is the president of the Sanhedrin and the other is the head of the court. Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach filled that role in their generation. Just time frame wise, Shimon ben Shetach lives during the period of what's his name? Alexander Yanai, who is one of the Hasmonean kings during the, and he reigns roughly during the latter part of the 2nd and into the 1st century of the Common Era. And he was not a fan of the rabbis. This will be much more of an issue for Shimon ben Shetach because his sister happens to be married to the guy. And when he dies and Alexandra ascends to the throne, the situation of the sages and specifically of the Pharisees, of whom Shimon ben Shetach is one of the leaders, changes rather radically and quickly. No nepotism whatsoever is to be inferred from that previous statement. Okay, so both Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach are going to again give us a pair of Mishnayot, a pair of passages which sort of complement each other, and they're going to focus on judicial process and practice, essentially. Right? So from Yehuda ben Tabai, we received the following teaching. When you are called upon to serve as a judge, do not play the lawyer. When litigants stand before you, think of both as plausibly guilty, but when they leave your courtroom and after having accepted your judgment, think of them both as innocent. Right? So we've seen the pattern where there's 3 statements that sort of comprise each of their broader teachings, and are all kind of interconnected. The first thing, before we even get to this,
I'm taking pictures. So that there's that you all were here. Go ahead.
we are definitely here. The first statement about judging is when you're called upon to serve as a judge. How do you become a judge? Right? If you his father-in-law says to Moses, "Are you insane? You are sitting and judging and deciding every issue that comes up in the entire camp. It's untenable. It's not viable. You're going to end up destroying yourself and the people along with you. Appoint trustworthy people who will adjudicate small matters, and the and create a chain, if you will, where if it's too tough for them, they'll kick it up to the next level. And if it stymies all of the lower courts, quote unquote, they'll bring it to you. And if you're stuck, you get to go ask God. Right? So you have the introduction of judicial appointments from whoever is the leader of the nation, right? Going forward in Israelite history, that authority will sometimes rest with the Kohen Gadol, with the high priest, and sometimes it will, when Israel develops one, rest with the monarch, right? In all of those cases, it's clear that the judge is meant to be an agent of either the sovereign or the Kohen Gadol, who imparts authority to that person and to whom that person is answerable.
Rabbi, was it ever like the Great Assembly? Now, was it ever an assembly decision, or was it always one person?
You mean, did the Great Assembly like vote on
Right, yeah.
judicial appointments?
Right. Other than just the king or just the high priest?
All right, not yet. And the Sanhedrin will in fact serve in some cases as the ultimate in high courts, but unlike what we might be familiar with, where there's a sort of a separation of powers between the administrative branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, the Sanhedrin is essentially both legislative and judicial, kind of intertwined into one, because there is no legislation the way we think of it. Rather, everything is an application of the rabbinic / judicial interpretation of the Torah. So what are the rules that govern commerce? They're all rooted in laws in the Torah that are adjudicated or used as the basis for creating additional legal material by the rabbis. Right? And so you've got that fusion. Administration is a little fuzzier, but it too ultimately rests with the Sanhedrin.
That brings up an interesting question about the sort of the authority of Pirkei Avot. I mean, it all sounds great, it's good, but I mean, what about don't have a conversation with a woman because you're asking for it, it's going to be some problems and da. So look, I mean, I can understand that would be that's the time, cultural type of thing, that women and men didn't come in close contact unless they were married.
Well, the problem was that men and women did come in close contact.
Sure, it wasn't looked upon as
but it was the suggestion, if you remember our conversation when we grappled with that particular aspect, was that there was a deep concern about the development of inappropriate relationships.
Okay, but this was conversation, I think it was talked about.
Well, okay, so where does what leads to what?
Well,
Conversation.
It's relationships develop gradually, right? The more you engage in conversation with others, the more you get to know the other person, the closer you may get. When you move into your college dorm, right? Do you know that the person that the college put you in with is going to become one of your lifelong friends? No. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. All right. But whether you do or you don't, it's a byproduct of interaction. Right? the more the interaction, the more boundaries and barriers diminish. Right? So,
Or increase.
or increase, yes, if there's a dislike, you may put up lots of walls and barriers between yourself and the other individual. Thank you, very important emendation. Right, so whether we, like the formulation or not, the reality is that it is talking about how do you form bonds with other people? How do you form connections with other people? And is there a danger? And I think for at least the author of that Mishnah, and remember, this is an anthology. Right? And as in any anthology, you may like certain things in it more than others. And our goal in studying this is to try to understand the teaching in its context and what, if anything, it might elucidate for us or edify us with.
Is it
Not good
Torah?
English, but you got
Is
it.
it, is it Torah?
It's all Torah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So is it prescriptive?
Okay,
Read this?
the problem is, I think you're understanding the word Torah too narrowly. All right?
I know it's developed, I mean, it's more than just the written Septuagint.
Well, it's beyond even that, all right? What is Torah? All right, anybody want to take a hazard a guess?
The pathway.
Huge.
It's, yes, yeah, it's huge and inclusive, right? And we have to sort of distinguish between Torah with a big T and Torah with a little t, right? Torah with a big T is what I would call the essential legal proscriptive, to use your term, Sam, requirements of Jewish life. This is what a Jewish community should look like. This is what a Jewish life lived by an individual should look like. These are the pieces. These are the divine expectations. And I'm not even going to, at the moment, come close to touching the question of whether any particular community does or doesn't conform to that. But as a matter of Torah, that's what it is. This is what God wants you to do individually and collectively. But you've got a whole other expansion of Torah, which is meant to be, rather than prescriptive, edificatory. Right? And a lot of Pirkei Avot, in many ways, falls into that second category of, you want to live a good life? Here's some pathways, some ways of doing it. You want to try to achieve the noblest, highest standards of morality and ethics. Here are some pathways to follow. Here are some models to think about.
Sam, what do you think those yeshiva students did for hundreds of years sitting around those tables talking?
Doodles. No, I have proof of that. I worked in the rare book room. I can tell you that some of the earliest folios and manuscripts of Talmud have doodles in them.
Maybe it helped them remember something. But I mean,
They
how
were
many
human.
hundreds of years have they sat around and interpreted?
Well, I think that could, I have a thought that all knowledge is contextual, okay? You can take the baseline for what it says, just the shot, just straight out, okay? But then also we know, or we have learned that there's the, Remez and
Okay.
Drash and.
Okay, so the rabbis looked at text as a platform, right, out of which they are going to elicit contemporary to whatever era applicability.
That's,
All right, and depending on whether they're engaged in legal process or non-legal process will determine the mechanisms by which they interpret the text. So, for example, the rabbis are not really biblical literalists,
right.
to a great degree, right? That's where drash comes in. Drash means to search out new meaning, right? To figure out an answer that's rooted in text to the question at hand, right? I'll take an easy one, right? No, this really is an easy one, all right? If you read the Ten Commandments, what does it say about Shabbat? It says,
We observe.
remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, 6 days how you work, all right? And when it comes to rest, it's you and your family and your ox and your horse and your turtle and all that stuff, okay? Does it define work? No. Well, what's the first question then comes to hand?
What's work?
What is work? What is it that I'm supposed to refrain from on Shabbat? And guess what? There is no definition, even though the term is used repeatedly in the Torah within the context and discussion of Shabbat. Now, that means one of a couple of things. It's such an obviously understood term that I don't have to define it because everybody knows what it means. Right? In the same way that we might talk about any given subject and never define the essential terms because we all know what we mean when we say X. Now, we might be better served if we were defining stuff a little bit more so that we really were all on the same page, but we routinely presume that people know what it means. It's like, no, can't believe I'm about to cite a commercial. Right? But there's this a progressive insurance commercial where the adults are talking and
Economics.
what's the economy? Oh, well, and then they dance around and they don't give the kid an answer and the kid just sort of walks away and goes, I'll just look it up. Right?
I love that commercial.
All right, but it proves my point in that all of the adults, whether they can define it or not, all understand what we mean when we say the economy. Though none of them can give this reasonable question from this kid an intelligent answer.
I would say the adults probably have as many, the CEO of a big company might have a different viewpoint of what economy means.
That's true. And the word itself, depending on the context, has different meaning.
True.
Right? So, but we use the term very freely and very loosely, and nobody ever says, by economy, I mean,
Can you imagine where that would take the conversation? Once they defined it.
well,
Well, what about this and what about?
this is part of the problem, and we're not to spoiler alert for next week's Mishnah, but that's part of what Shimon ben Shetach talks about is the importance of clarity in language and usage so as to not create confusion. Right? So I'm trying to sort of circle back to where we were. So tradition, Torah with a big T, drash is the explication of it to answer questions of how do I fulfill this commandment? I want to observe Shabbat. How do I do that? How do I define work? What are the things that I'm supposed to do in observance of Shabbat? What are the things I'm supposed to refrain from as part of my observance of Shabbat? And is what I'm permitted or precluded from doing on Shabbat also true on festivals?
Depends.
And the answer is no. They're not exactly the same. There are things that are permitted on festivals that are not permitted on Shabbat, right? But that all has to be parsed out by the sages, right? If, however, they're engaged in a more homiletic process,
Homiletic meaning.
meaning I want to teach you a lesson. I want to give you a message, an idea. It's not a matter of law. It's just an insight, an idea that can help guide you, right? In that process, I'll use more extreme interpretive methods that may not really be that rooted in the text, but it gives me a springboard, a platform from which to teach something. Right? And so the rabbis saw the distinction between the legal and the non-legal. And they gave themselves a lot more latitude in the non-legal realm because ideas evolve and change. And the message that I give today, the sermon that I give today, I may repudiate, I keep a lot of stuff. I think most rabbis keep a lot of stuff. But all right, but I look back at sermons I gave like a decade ago and like, what the heck were you thinking?
But
How did you even say that with a straight face?
you're not the same person.
I'm not the same person. The world's not the same place.
The situation isn't
Yeah.
the same.
All sorts of things have changed. And but sometimes I go like, really? And I'm going, but on one level, it doesn't matter that I would not give that same sermon a decade later because it's irrelevant or to me, but it's a sermon. It's like, okay, in the same way that, some weeks someone will like a sermon I give and some weeks someone won't like a sermon. It'll speak to someone one week, it'll speak to someone different a different week. It's fluid. Right? But it doesn't go to the essential of what is Judaism, the way legal stuff does.
But what's really important, what you just shared as to what you might have said 5 years, 10 years, even 15 years down the road, it's important that you keep that and that you do review it because we do forget what we used to think.
Mhm.
And I think it's really, really important to remember that we didn't always think the same way. And we do forget. We tend to want to forget.
Sometimes,
good.
I think any of us who had the opportunity when at JTS to study with Rabbi Neil Gilman may have, whether consciously or otherwise, adopted that model because one of the things that Neil of blessed memory used to do is at the beginning of every semester, you had to write a position paper. Sometimes more focused, sometimes broader, and you had to articulate your philosophy of Judaism. And then at the end of the semester, he would ask you to write another one. Because he would consider it a personal failure if what you wrote at the beginning of September was the same as what you wrote at the end of December. Right? Because it's like,
What did I
did nothing that we talked about, that I taught you, that I shared with you, did nothing affect anything? Well, either I failed as a teacher or you failed as a student, but somewhere in there, there's a disconnect. Right? And now we're talking only a period of months. Now, granted, it's a philosophy class, so you're sort of more in the mode of thinking and evolving than you might be as in the foreground of your mind year to year to year to year. We don't always appreciate change and transformation. But and sometimes we do. It's like, okay, comic strip. one of my favorites, baby blues. Right? Now, part of the reason this was a favorite in our household is their family sort of mirrored ours in that they had a daughter and then a son and then a daughter, which sort of followed our pattern. And at one point, the daughter is talking to her mother and says, you know, when you were a little girl, you were Wanda. And then when you were in high school, you were Wanda. And when you were in college, you were Wanda. And when you got married, you were still Wanda. And then I was born and you became mom. Right? It's like transformative. And it's not like, you know, Wanda was the same all the way through, but all of a sudden a whole new identity was grafted on with all of the implications. And so moments like that, we're much more aware of the change that's happening to us. But more often than not, change is much more subtle and evolutionary rather than in the moment.
Delineated.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Torah, right? Which means Torah is 5 books of Moses, big T, and if I want the rabbinic overlay on that, and Torah is everything else in Jewish culture and civilization. So it's really narrow and really huge. Okay, so is this Torah? Absolutely. Is it law? No, because they're not speaking in legal language. They're talking about, you want to be a good judge? You want to be a fair judge? You want to be a successful judge? This is how you go about it. It's methodology, not mandate.
Question.
Yes.
Here's a judge, there's a judge. What kind of cases would they be hearing? Because they both.
Okay. That's
But you couldn't find a murderer when they depart innocent, so.
okay. So it's clear that at least in this situation, they're dealing
Small claims.
more monetary and interpersonal stuff, less criminal kind of stuff, which would have been result. But even in the criminal stuff, right, the difference is in criminal stuff, you don't really have a plaintiff and a defendant the same way that you do in the scenario here, which is why this is more civil rather than criminal. But even in the criminal one, when you get to the end, there's a certain amount of truth that's applied as well, which we'll see in a moment. But yes, very, very good observation. Yes, we're dealing primarily now with civil stuff. Could be commercial, could be interpersonal, could be neighbors fighting over their fence and a boundary. It's that kind of stuff, right? Now, we also established partially that judges sometimes are placed by the authority of either the Kohen Gadol, the high priest who's at the top of the pyramid, or at a certain point in Israelite society, the monarch who's in place. And part of what we're going to see here is, and that's where the phraseology, when you are called upon to serve as a judge, who's calling you? Well, in this period, especially when it came to civil matters, the parties to the case would appoint judges. Right? And there's a debate as to, so I'm just going to pick on the two of you because you're sitting opposite each other. You would appoint someone to be a judge and you would appoint someone to be a judge, and either the two of you together would appoint a third judge, or the two judges would invite someone to be a third judge with them.
Okay.
Right? So that's what it means to be invited to be a judge. It's not like this was a full-time position. And you had a bench somewhere and a bailiff that said, hear ye, hear ye. This was situational. We're having a dispute over a boundary marker, we need someone to adjudicate. We're having a financial disagreement because of a business thing that happened. We need someone to adjudicate the case. And we grab 3 people, sometimes only 1, but usually for monetary matters, they preferred a court of 3. Who would you choose? Well, you would choose people who had a reputation for knowledge in this field or in this area. So that you're going to someone whose expertise is recognized by the parties involved. And so when you are asked to be a judge and adjudicate a matter, do not be a lawyer. Don't, because part of the role of the judge is to ask a lot of, in this case, is to ask a lot of questions. But your goal in asking the questions is to extract the truth of the situation, not necessarily to sort of ask questions that benefit one party or the other, or ask a question that's going to give one party or the other an opportunity to say something that may skew things. You don't want to direct. I mean, that's kind of what trial lawyers are set up to do. They're designed to ask you the kinds of questions that will benefit you, whereas the judges have an obligation to get to the truth. Well, we're also going to explore a slightly different understanding of that passage at the end. All right. And so when you are in the midst of a case, you have to operate from the presumption that either party is guilty. That you could be wrong, in the wrong, you could be in the wrong. I don't prejudge it and I don't advocate anything. I take in information and listen.
Is that objectivity?
That's objectivity. Absolutely. You're not prejudicial.
You're impartial.
You are impartial, but you're skeptical and critical of all of the arguments and statements that you hear. Not in a adversarial sort of way, but it's like, oh, explain that statement, please. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by what you said. Don't just take it on the surface. Skepticism. I don't trust you. I don't trust you, but not in a adversarial sort of way. It's like, I know you're here to plead on your behalf and you're here to plead on your behalf. And I recognize that. And I have to get past that to get to the truth.
So isn't it more, rather than saying, I don't trust you, is I don't have enough information? Or is that being?
No, I think we could say that, but I think skepticism is an important aspect of it. Even if I want to say I'm skeptical about whether I have all the information you have to give me. I think at a certain point it's a question of how nice do we want to be in saying it, right? But and then they get to the last part of the statement, in which once both parties have acknowledged and accepted the judgment rendered, they revert to a state of innocence. In other words, whichever party is found guilty makes amends, restitution, whatever it is that is required. But once amends are made, both parties exit and move forward in the state of innocence that preceded this entire episode.
A clean slate.
It's a clean slate, right? It's this sense of
There's no holding a grudge.
There's no
No
grudge
grudge.
holding. Yes, that's a great way to phrase it. It allows people to move forward without baggage. That's an important, essential thought. Right? So the goal, if you will, is to correct the breach in society. The goal of the judicial process is not so much to ascribe blame as much as to enable the parties to get past that so that society can operate smoothly. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the two of you are then going to go back into business together. Or maybe it will, because it's like, you know what? It was resolved and I don't, it's like, it's done. So this is, how do you function as a judge in this capacity? How do you treat the parties in front of you? That's really the essence of it. And there's a great statement by Oliver Cromwell, which Gordon Tucker throws into his commentary, which says, I beseech you, think it possible that you may be mistaken. So sort of a little bit of humility for the judges. Like, yes, you were brought in for your erudition and your insight and your knowledge on this, but you're not perfect. So be a little humble in the process. Okay. Now, part of why I happen to like this particular commentary, not just because, which is same stream as the Siddur, but mine has more words. Is partly because Gordon was one of my teachers when I was in rabbinical school, and I've learned a great deal from him over the years since then. But it also introduced me to another rabbinic voice, which is that of Rabbi Tamar Eldad Applebaum, who's a rabbi in Jerusalem. And part of what she does in her comments to this section was, how does this relate or apply to me, to us, to today? After all, most of us are not being invited to act as part of a tribunal to adjudicate matters, right? Civil stuff is adjudicated in there's a whole infrastructure for adjudicating that sort of stuff. And even if I want to keep it in the Jewish world, which many traditional Jews will do, so if Yankel and Shlomo have a dispute about something, they don't go to, the civil court up the road. They go to the Beit Din. They go to the rabbinic court, which again impacts on the Beit Din, the rabbis of the court, but doesn't really impact on the general population. So she writes, she has an interesting observation, right? Don't make yourself like an attorney. So what does that mean for us non-legal folk? And she says, refrain from assuming a prosecutorial outlook on the world. How do lawyers operate? What's the mindset? You look for advantage. You look for the gotchas. You look for the thing that will prove your case one way or the other.
You look for the thing that will prove your case the way you want it to be proved.
Well, that one, yes, but it's like the prosecutor is looking for certain things and may ignore others. The defense attorney will look for certain things and will hope the judge may ignore others, right? That's their role and function. They look at it through a certain lens, through a certain prism. And it is very much focused on the case, and it's a mindset of accusation and counter accusation. And part of what I think Rabbi L. Applebaum is suggesting, and from here, at this point, she's leaving the realm of the courtroom and talking to ordinary folk, right? How do we look at the world? Do we look at it as through an antagonistic lens? Do we look for the dark side of everything and everyone?
Sort of a Hobbesian,
Yeah.
outlook, you know, brutal, short.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Or do we see society, and I'm going to quote her, as a web woven of threads of different souls and distinct individuals? It's a very different way of looking at other people. It's a much more positive way of looking at other people. Do we use one aspect of what we know about a person as a definer of the entirety of who they are? Do we find the thing that separates us from others more so than we find the many possible things that could connect us?
But, Rabbi, you could explain away somebody's felonious action by saying, well, look, here's the home life he had, here's what he was up against, here's what he never learned or did or that, the other. So what I haven't heard yet is the word justice in terms of what the judge is supposed to do.
Well,
I
just
understand, I mean, I agree with everything you said, I just.
but
Yeah.
like I said, we've left behind on one level the courtroom in her comment,
Okay.
right? Yes, the judicial process is supposed to come out with a just conclusion in the matter between the two plaintiffs, right? In the same way that if it's a criminal case, there has to be justice applied. But if I'm reading Yehuda ben Tabai correctly, bless you.
Thank you. You have another
How do you look at, see, and interact with the person who has been judged to be guilty and done whatever it is that the court chooses as their punishment? How do I look at that person afterwards?
After he's served the punishment?
After they have accepted the ruling of the court and done whatever the court has required, right? Let's say it's you stole my sheep, and the court says, well, since you stole my sheep, you have to reimburse the person whose sheep you stole by giving them 4 sheep, 5 if you actually killed the sheep, right? It's not that there's not consequence, it's what do you do after the consequence,
I agree with that. I mean,
right?
like losing your voting rights because you went to jail for something, and when you served your time, you should be a citizen again.
Right, okay? How do you, and I think part of what Yehuda ben Tabai is suggesting is the acceptance of the consequences of your actions and the ruling of the court that led to those allows for a reset. as opposed to, oh, you committed this crime, ergo, I will treat you in perpetuity as a criminal, or I will suspect you of criminal behavior. Now, the reality is, there is definitely recidivism amongst criminals. This is not exactly a brilliant insight or news flash. But that's partly where the question of context applies. And to some degree, I'm going to suggest that Rabbi Eldad Applebaum's suggestion is a bit set in an idyllic world. Right? All right, let's go back to our sheep thief, right? What prompted the thief to steal your sheep in the first place? I was walking along and, oh, there's a lovely little sheep. I'm just going to scoop it up and take it home with me. That seems a little,
Ha ha ha.
it doesn't seem, I mean, that's usually not what motivates, right? Now, there may be, and there are some people who will act out of, oh, well, that's a fully grown sheep. I don't have to raise it. I could just, take it home, slaughter it, and we can have lamb for the next 3 months or whatever. I'll pop it in the freezer, easy peasy.
My mind went a whole different way.
Mhm.
The sheep on this property is property of a known excellent breeder. I want those genes in my herd.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, but maybe there's a better way to go about that. It's like, hey, Sam, you are awesome at this. Can I buy one of your sheep?
Yes.
Or can I
And you
rent
step
rent one of your sheep to have a play date with some of my ewes? There are ways of, right, but yes, the motivation might be there, or the motivation might be less pernicious. But
What about, I mean, there was that other side of it. Took the sheep because they were hungry and they had no other source of food.
Which was
Right.
the first one?
yeah, so there is that possibility, but if in fact I return the person who is in a position of need such that they took the sheep, if I put them back in the same situation, then I can probably predict a high rate of recidivism. Like, this is part of the problem we face as a society. This country has one of the highest incarceration rates amongst Western democracies, if not the highest.
I think it is the
Oh,
highest,
It-
yeah.
All right, and by the way, even if we're only number 2 in this one, that's not the position you want to be in, but it raises the question of why is that so? What is either broken in our societal structure and system that's different from Denmark or some other Western democracy where the rate of incarceration and crime is significantly lower?
Poverty levels, benefits, healthcare,
Yeah,
schooling.
we could probably, all right, but that's a societal problem that has to be addressed, and unless and until it's addressed, the rate of incarceration is not going to go down all of a sudden, and the rate of recidivism is not going to go away because I haven't fixed whatever the problem was. And yes, there are certain people who just act without regard or concern for law and society. And they have to be held accountable. That's where the justice piece of it comes in, because I have to both punish them appropriate to their malfeasance and misconduct, because that's the only way I can ensure justice for the people who are harmed by those people. And it's much easier to say that than it is to do it in the real world. I recognize that.
Why the prophet said, justice shalt thou pursue.
It's an active, yeah, but it's not an easy, right? And how people are is very much a product of their genetics and their experience. But if we are always scanning for the negative, for the reason to prosecute that person, then we are missing the potential of seeing the positive in that person, or the godly that our tradition tells us exists in every person, and some people just mess it up. You know, there's a great metaphor, I don't remember where this midrash is, but it compares the soul to like a gemstone, like a diamond. Diamonds are shiny when they're, you know, when the facets are
When they're
cut,
Yeah.
you know, they're cut, they're polished, right? Now, if I were to wear this ring while I was digging in the backyard and it got covered in mud, is it as shiny? No, because I've hidden the luster underneath the dirt. But if I go inside and I give it a good wash, then I can restore the luster, because I've removed that which is hiding it. Same thing with the soul, with the spark of divinity. I can either put it in a beautiful setting such that it shines brightly, or I can cover it up with yuck and, by my negative behaviors, so that it doesn't shine forth. But the choice is mine. And how I choose to look at others before I even really know them is important. Do I see the potential shine, or do I see just the layer of mud? And I think part of what Yehuda ben Tabai is trying to get us to is, maybe this civil strife has hidden some of the luster of each individual. But once the matter is resolved and both parties acknowledge and accept the resolution, I push the mud away and allow each of them to resume their lustrous status. This is not a legal statement, it's a mindset. Okay. Questions, thoughts? Because that pretty much is everything I had on this particular Mishnah, and I have no idea what time it is.
It's almost 1 o'clock.
It's 12:58, so I
Yeah.
guess it's just as well that I don't have anything else to say on the subject.
Just a structural question.
Structural question, yeah, fire away.
The Amoraim and the Tanaim.
Yes,
The Tanaim came first, yes?
okay, yes, so the Zugot, these pairs, predate the Tannaitic era in many ways.
So So they're not part of the Tanaim?
This group, I would say, is not really part of the Tanaim. The Tanaitic era is kind of a little bit later, maybe after Hillel and Shammai, or maybe beginning with Hillel and Shammai. Some people might include these guys. I'm not sure that I would, right? The Amoraic era, the era of the Amoraim, begins after the codification and completion of the Mishnah. All right, so the Mishnah is completed by Rabbi Yehuda Anasi somewhere around 200 to 225 of the Common Era. So any scholars and sages after that are considered Amoraim. Those before are Tanaim, and some of these guys are proto-rabbis. They're precursors to the Tanaim.
Thank you.
Let me move my little sticky thingy so I'll know where we start next time.